On with the main event. Our speaker tonight, Haley Healey, hails from Muskoka Lakes, Ontario. Presently, she is a high school counselor in Nanaimo, as well as a registered clinical counselor. Her interests include local history, that should go without saying, cycling, the violin, and exploring and connecting with Vancouver Island. She has a particular interest in wild places and meeting unconventional people, both of which are plentiful on Vancouver Island. And they might be the inspirations for future books to be written by Haley. So with that, thank you, Haley, for participating with us.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for that lovely introduction also. It's really nice to see everybody. I am recording this today from the traditional territory of this Nanaimo First Nation, where I'm very grateful to learn, live, and write. I'm the author of 2 books published with Heritage House Publishing. The first one is called On Their Own Terms, True Stories of Trailblazing Women of Vancouver Island. And the second one is Flourishing and Free, More Stories of Trailblazing Women of Vancouver Island. I have some sort of exciting news that I have a fiction coming out that takes place in a fictional Nanaimo called Doveport, and looks a little bit at the coal mining disaster of 1887. But also some contemporary sort of things, and so it goes back and forth between the late 1800s and modern day, and takes place in an old character house that's based on 2 sort of actual character houses in Nanaimo. I'm going to share my screen. I've got a little bit of a PowerPoint, so I will share my screen here, and here we go. Okay. Is somebody able to give me just a thumbs up or a yes that you're able to see it? Oh, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Great. So I've introduced the 2 books. Really briefly, so just a little outline of today, I guess. I'll give you a very brief personal history, a little bit about the sort of process of writing and researching, and then we'll finish by looking at a few local Nanaimo women from the book. So I wanted to focus on Nanaimo, give Nanaimo a bit of a spotlight here. So we'll look at that, but there are lots of other stories in the book too. And I just also want to thank everyone. I know a lot of you were at my launch and have already picked up a copy of the book, and just have given loads of support in that, and just encouragement with it. So I just want a big shout out to everyone for that. Great, so tiny bit of my personal history. I didn't set out to be a writer. I grew up in Muskoka, Ontario, in cottage country of Ontario. I did my undergraduate degree in Sudbury, Ontario at Laurentian University. Then I moved to BC in 2009 to tree plant and work at an outdoor education center called Strathcona Park Lodge that has quite a neat history itself, and is between Campbell River and Gold River, and just outside of Strathcona Park. So I fell in love with the island. I've been here ever since. I did my teaching degree here. I did my master's. I did my master's online while I was working. And now I'm a school counselor at John Barsby in South Nanaimo, that I'm told used to be 5-acre farms. And my office is probably right where a farm used to be. So my writing journey started after I hiked the Hesquiat Peninsula, which is a peninsula jutting out on Vancouver Island's west coast, north of Tofino and south of Gold River. Myself and a few friends hiked for about 4 days, and then we ended the hike with a tour of Cougar Annie's Garden. Some of us may have been to Cougar Annie's Garden. It's a pretty neat place. It's accessed only by float plane and boat, and it's the site of where a woman named Ada Annie Ray Arthur preempted land and moved there with a few of her children and her husband. And she ended up having 10 more children while she was there. And she ended up having a store, a post office, mail order nursery, and she ended up just building beautiful gardens that became very famous for, especially for their dahlias. So after this, I was just amazed by Cougar Annie's story. And she was also a bounty hunter, so hence her name, Cougar Annie. She hunted cougars for bounty. So, and also because they would go after her goats, and so some of her life, and chickens and that. So after this, I was just amazed, and I wanted to know, wow, are there more people who, you know, stories haven't been told and maybe aren't even as well known as Cougar Annie? And it turns out that there were. So I, after the hiking trip, I set out to tell her story and a few other trailblazing women. So women who were doing unusual, remarkable things and making a difference in their world at the time. So On Their Own Terms, what came out in May of 2020. And it was, yeah, I'm very grateful for Heritage House Publishing for putting it out. Heritage House is in Victoria. And then Flourishing and Free came out in May 2020. And the stories in Flourishing and Free are no less amazing. I like to really make that clear. It's just that either I discovered them afterwards or they weren't able to fit in the first one. And so Heritage House, again, really grateful, decided to put out a second book. So yeah, so that's really great. And then coming in October, and if anyone is interested, I'll maybe give a chance at the end that people can put their emails if you're interested in being invited to the launch. I'm hoping for in person, but just not sure. I'll kind of pivot if I need to. So yeah, coming out mid-October is a fiction called Immortal Grit. It's historical, based in Nanaimo, and it's about a woman who was affected by the Nanaimo coal mine disaster. And I just love character houses and am very intrigued by them. So this, I guess I could say that this, the house is a little bit of a character in the story, and it's quite an active setting. So looking out for that. So looking at the research for On Their Own Terms and Flourishing and Free, and also for Immortal Grit, I did quite a bit of research for that also. Community archives were one of the really major places I went for my research. So big shout out to Christine at Nanaimo Archives, and a lot of other archives I used it as well. So Salt Spring Island, Victoria, and Port Alberni as well. And a lot of these archives, it's really great, have some of their material and many of their photos online. So it makes it really convenient, especially sort of during COVID times, to do research when some of it is online. And then of course, going to the archives as well. The BC archives, of course, a super rich source of information, just a lot of their data on just births, dates of birth, dates of death, marriage certificates, and all of that kind of genealogical data. Great photos and lots of information, so online, but also in person. And then newspapers, just looking up, a lot of newspapers are now have been put online and are just really great and searchable. So you can search for like a word or search for a few words and pull up all of the newspaper articles with those words in them. So newspapers have been great. Family members, as much as I could, I contacted family members of some of the women in the books and asked them, interviewed them if they were interested, got photos from them, information from them. And also really important to me was to, as much as I could, check that the stories were portraying them in a way that the family was really happy with and that the family felt good about. So as much as I could, I sent off to family members to look over, to take a peek, and make edits as I needed to. This ended up, contacting the family members ended up actually being one of the best parts of writing both the books. I really met some quite remarkable and very interesting people So I met the grandson of Aloha Wanderwell. Richard Diamond was really helpful with it. George Kwok's sister is the son of Elizabeth Kwok's sister, and he's up in Campbell River, and really just, yeah, involved in his community and involved in different environmental initiatives, and a pretty amazing person. And then also met someone, an Irish gentleman named Colm O'Rourke, who made a website about Lillian Bland, who was a settler at Quatsino Sound on northern Vancouver Island. And she built and flew her own plane. And so Colm had made a really great website that was really useful and was really helpful. And then I also used so websites as well, especially websites made by family members, and books as well. So Margaret Horsfield, for example, her book about Cougar Annie's garden was really useful in Cougar Annie's story. So jumping into a few of the women in the books, Emma Stark, I'll start with. Emma appears in On Their Own Terms, and many people have probably heard of Emma. She's featured at the Nanaimo Museum, and there's also some sort of memorials for her, commemorative plaques in Nanaimo, and also a huge stone, a huge stone monument almost in the field of the Chase River Elementary. I'm not sure if anyone's been to that, but there's sort of a bench, and it's over on the side by where there's a barn that some people think is the Stark barn, was her family's barn. So Emma has a really interesting history, and I'm going to read just a really short excerpt, I hope it's all right, from Emma's profile. It won't be long, and many of you have read it already if you've read the book, but for the people who haven't, it's just sort of a good, just a good introduction. So the Starks valued education, and at some point sent Emma and her sister Marie to North Cedar School, as there was no school in the Cranberry area. Back then, it was common for students who lived far from the school to live in a cabin beside the school during the week. Emma and Marie did this, since their house was more than 13 kilometers away. Sylvia would come and get the girls to bring them home on weekends. Sylvia was her mom. They traveled by horseback, Marie riding with her mother and Emma riding her own horse. When the bridge over the Cedar River was being repaired, Emma would have likely ridden through water so deep that her legs would have been submerged in the cold river water. In winter, they traveled in a hand-built, oxen-pulled sled. So Emma went on to become a teacher herself after she was a student. And there's some pretty interesting, sad but sort of interesting circumstances surrounding her father's sort of a mysterious death, and because of some coal on his property. So some people may have heard about that. Read on in her story to read a little bit more about that mystery surrounding that, and still sort of some unsolved, a little bit of an unsolved mystery around that. The next person that I have to talk about is Edith Berkeley. So when you're driving up Hammond Bay Road, you pass Departure Bay, turn right onto Hammond Bay Road and drive up, as if you're going to Piper's in Nanaimo, Piper's Lagoon. You pass the Pacific Biological Center turnoff, and just past that, there's a road called Berkeley Place. So I had never noticed that until I started researching Edith Berkeley, but it's named after a pretty remarkable woman who did research at the Pacific Biological Center. And that woman was Edith Berkeley. So she was a marine biologist. She studied marine worms, and she lived a lot of places before moving to Nanaimo. Her husband was also worked at the Pacific Biological Center, and they had a daughter while they were in Nanaimo who also went on to be a scientist. And yeah, it was pretty unusual for a woman to be doing research at that time. There were lots of different rules sort of around it. but Edith always made it work, and her profile or her story is pretty interesting. So I will do a little bit of read you a little bit from her profile. In 1919, Edith Berkeley arrived in the coal mining town of Nanaimo, BC, to study marine worms. Despite having attended London University, where she earned a degree in zoology, she was not permitted to be staff and had to settle instead for being a volunteer investigator at the Pacific Biological Station in Nanaimo's Departure Bay. At this time, it was not common for women to take up government research jobs or positions in academia. Edith was undaunted by her demotion to volunteer researcher. In many ways, being a volunteer afforded her more freedom than being a female staff member. She was able to conduct research, do field work, and publish her work freely despite being married, whereas paid female staff were expected to stop working if they married. She made the absolute most of the opportunities she had. In fact, she became a world authority on marine polychaetes, marine worms. Edith's research on marine worms in the waters off Nanaimo led to her publishing 12 papers as sole author and 34 with her husband Cyril as co-author. She reveled in studying worms previously never studied, some from depths of up to nearly 5 kilometers. Her research put the Pacific Biological Station on the map and contributed to the growth and its reputation. Many female researchers of this time had to publish their work under their husbands' names, but Edith published much of her work under her own name. So read on in Edith's story to hear about her life before coming to Nanaimo. It was quite exciting, and then also in the profile, there's quite a bit more about her legacy as a researcher and marine biologist. All right, so Mary Ellen Smith, again, many people have probably heard of her. This is a little later now. And so Mary Ellen Smith was a politician, and the road, there's actually another similar to Edith. She has a road named after her. It's one that you may have seen probably more often. So anytime we're driving north from Nanaimo, you pass Mary Ellen Drive. Just if you're heading north, past Ald's Road is Mary Ellen Drive. So I had no idea until I started researching who Mary Ellen was, but pretty neat to know her story. So hopefully more people know who that road was named after now. So I'll read a little bit about Mary Ellen Smith. And I didn't mention before, but Edith Berkeley is in Flourishing and Free. So Emma Stark, who I talked about before, was in the first book, On Their Own Terms. Edith was in Flourishing and Free, and Mary Ellen Smith is in Flourishing and Free also. Okay. Politics is likely not the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Nanaimo, British Columbia. Perhaps you envision bustling ferry terminals, horse-drawn coal carts, or royal blue water in a calm harbor, a slow boat gliding through and a seal's black dog-like head peeking above the surface. Or maybe you imagine biting into a chocolatey custard-filled Nanaimo bar. Not politics, though. Although Nanaimo might not be readily associated with politics, the city was home to a trailblazing politician and suffragist named Mary Ellen Smith. Mary Ellen Smith was the first of many things. She was the first woman to become a member of the Legislative Assembly, MLA, in British Columbia, and the first woman in the British Empire to become a cabinet minister and speaker. Mary Ellen Smith was born Mary Ellen Spear in southern England in 1863. Her mother was Mary Ann Spear and her father was a copper miner named Richard Jackson Spear. She attended school in Northumberland, attaining teacher training, and became an elementary school teacher. She loved music, singing, and drama. In 1883, Mary Ellen married a man named Ralph Smith, and in 1892, the couple moved to Canada, settling in Nanaimo. British Columbia, where Ralph worked first as a coal miner and then as a preacher. Over the years, Mary Ellen and Ralph had 5 children, a daughter and 4 sons, and Ralph eventually became very involved with the early mine unions. Union work led him to politics, and by 1916, he was the Minister of Finance for the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia. Mary Ellen helped him campaign and would sometimes give speeches if he wasn't able to make a speaking engagement. In 1917, 2 unprecedented things happened. Women got the right to vote, and Mary Ellen's husband died suddenly. Mary Ellen decided to run in the by-election as an independent Liberal. She won by a large margin. In fact, she won by the largest majority by a candidate to date. With this, she took her husband's spot in the legislature under Premier John Oliver. This was historic for British Columbia and Canada. Mary Ellen was the first woman in the British Empire to be in the legislature. So read on in Mary Ellen's story to hear a little bit more about her accomplishments, what she did in her career, and yeah, I guess she did and what she did outside of her career as a politician as well. So the next woman I wanted to talk about is Sylvia Stark. She's also in Flourishing and Free. And I wanted to mention something just in the books and just how I decided to order it. And some of you might know this. I talked about it a little bit at my launch. When I was deciding how to order the profiles in the books, I ended up deciding to order them geographically from south to north. So for both of the books, I decided to start in Victoria and then work my way up Vancouver Island. So in both the books, you start in Victoria with women who lived there, and then you slowly move up the island. And there's some pretty neat women from northern Vancouver Island, Cape Scott settlers, a woman who owned a brothel in Sea Otter Cove, which is pretty much part of Cape Scott Park. And of course, Lillian Bland, who I mentioned before, who built and flew her own plane and was in Quatsino Sound. So that's how they're ordered. That's how the profiles are ordered in the books. So the last woman I wanted to talk about, I wanted to leave a little bit of time in case anyone had questions, and I also wanted to talk a little bit about just a little bit more about my fiction and just show a picture of that. But Sylvia Stark was Emma's mom. So I wanted to mention her. I did come across her in my research for Emma, and I thought about combining her story with Emma's for the first book. And then with the help of Heritage House, we decided that she really needed her own profile. She needed her own story. Her story is quite amazing, and there was actually almost more research when I started digging into it about Sylvia. And she, at one point, I think when she passed away, was the oldest person on Salt Spring Island at the time. So her story takes place in Nanaimo and also Salt Spring Island, and is pretty remarkable. So yeah, I'll read a little bit from Sylvia's profile. In 1858, 35 Black Americans arrived on Vancouver Island by ship. Over the next 2 years, 600 more would arrive and settle. In the colony of Vancouver Island, which included the Gulf Islands, Black people could vote, own businesses, and buy land. Of the 600 people who arrived on the Saanich Peninsula, some moved to Victoria and others to Salt Spring Island. Sylvia's parents, Hannah and Howard, bought land in Saanich. Sylvia and Louis, that's her husband, chose Salt Spring Island. Back then, farmers could preempt up to 200 acres of land on Salt Spring Island at a rate of $1.25 per acre. Single men could preempt 100 acres, while married men 200 acres. Women could preempt land only if they were widowed with dependents. The land was a wilderness, thick with trees and needing to be cleared in order to be farmed. In 1860, Sylvia, Louis, and their 2 children arrived on Salt Spring Island. As was customary back then, they were dropped by ship to their new island home. Their 15 cows were lowered into the water and had to swim to shore. Sylvia was pregnant at the time. For Sylvia and Louis, who had their 3rd child only 4 months after they moved, life in the wilderness on an island in the Pacific Ocean took a lot of adjustment. Their first home was an unfinished log cabin deep in the forest. They put the roof on it themselves, and before it was completed, it had a quilt as a makeshift door. Additionally, no ferries serviced Salt Spring Island in those days. Pioneers had to take ships or use their own boats if they wanted to leave. At first, Sylvia felt isolated and lonely. Sylvia and Louis cleared their land and built a house on it. They used slash and burn method of land clearing, a legal and common practice on Salt Spring Island until the 1920s. Next, oxen-powered tractors were used to plow the crops, wheat and corn being the most common. Read on in Sylvia's profile to read a little bit more about what life was like on Salt Spring Island and about her life in Nanaimo as well, because she did spend part of her life in Nanaimo in the Chase River area. And I was really glad to find a lot of more information about her. I was really glad to be able to include her in the second book. So that was a few readings of Nanaimo women from On Their Own Terms and Flourishing and Free. And I just wanted to mention where you can get them. You can get them at Window Seat Books in Nanaimo, Well Read Books in Nanaimo, any local bookstore. The BC Ferries carries at least Flourishing and Free. As a last resort, Amazon and the Island Roots online market. And I've heard people enjoy getting them as gifts for people. They're $10 each, and lots of people of different ages have seemed to really enjoy them, and of course men as well as women. There's usually a story in there for everybody, no matter what your sort of interest or passion is. And I just wanted to mention again to look out for Immortal Grit coming out in October, and following a woman who was affected by the coal mine disaster and living in a fictional Nanaimo, and ends up building a business from that. So and I will show the back of it as well. And so this will be available at Window Seat as well, Amazon as well, Well Read Books, and probably the online farmers market also. With that, I wanted to see if anyone had any questions. And also I wanted to mention that I really appreciate if there's something that's mistaken in the research or in any of my books. I do like getting emails from people, and I do take note of it to put into, to edit, so that if there's another printing, I can make sure to make it as correct as possible. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes the information is sort of conflicting. Sometimes you just find information that isn't correct and somebody has more correct information. So so if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat, or unmute yourself and say them.
Well, this isn't so much a question, it's a comment. I'd like to commend you for your research, and particularly your boots on the ground research, where you actually spoke with the families and looked them up and looked into it, because so much with the internet, everything's at our fingertips. And a lot of times now people don't go that extra mile to really dig deep and bring some color to their your research.
Thank you. Yeah, it was definitely one of the best parts, just connecting with people. It was so rich. And yeah, I mentioned George Kwok's sister in Campbell River, Elizabeth's son. Really amazing. Vi Mundy, Barbara Tucci's daughter is in Ucluelet. Both of those people I met before COVID, so in person. It feels like a long time ago now, but really grateful just to meet them and keep in touch with them online now, of course, but to have met them in person and just the stories they have about the stories they had about their parents and that they were willing to share. And so I could put them into the books. Really, really inspiring stories and a really special part of the whole experience.
Haley, hi. Do you have any leftovers? Do you have more stories? Do you have to do a third book on this?
Oh, that's a really good question. A few from Vancouver Island. So there might be something going on in 2022, possibly. Not the same format, but look out for something a little bit different, and it would be all of BC, not just Vancouver Island. But I recently heard of Sarah Spencer. I'm not sure if anyone has heard of her. She was in Victoria, and yeah, her house is actually where the Victoria Art Gallery is now, I think. And she was quite involved in a lot of organizations, and I had somebody reach out to me with quite a bit of information they had gathered about her and how she was involved in Victoria and the difference she made. And she hadn't been recognized anywhere, so they were wanting her recognized. So she would be one an island person, a Vancouver Island person, but definitely some in BC and Yukon who will be in the other book with a slightly different format and some illustrations, which will be neat. Not done by myself, but that will add some richness, just add some interest to it, I think. Oh,
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Dallas. Oh, thanks for the question, Dallas, in the chat. What is your next project? Are there still more Vancouver Island women's stories to be told? So yeah, the next project is yeah, the one with BC and Yukon. It will be shorter ones with illustrations 2022. And so yeah, really excited for that. And then also I'm pretty interested in, I really like mysteries. So possibly like a Vancouver Island mystery, but I need to really look at the format of writing a mystery book because there's a lot to it, I think. And yeah, I think it's different than other fiction. So, and then yeah, Caroline or Carolyn, thank you for the question. When did you do most of your writing and research, given your full-time job? Yeah, so most of it was done in the summers. So in the summer, I would get up early, get up when my husband's going to work, and I'm a morning person. I work really well in the morning, so I would sit at my laptop and get as much done as I could in the morning, and then do different things in the afternoon, or just continue writing in the afternoon after a break. So yeah, summers primarily, and then some of the editing was done while I was working, and that was squeezed in the evening or on weekends with many cups of coffee and tea. So yeah, how did you find the women? Oh, thank you. Yeah, from Nora. So I found them a lot of the same places where I found the research. So community archives, the online community archives, books, a lot from books. So I would find a book and then, yeah, find a woman in there. Recently, yeah, sometimes from people. So from David, told me about one of the women. So sometimes people would tell me, yeah, and Christine, I think, gave me a few ideas too. So yeah, people telling me, hey, have you heard of this person, or have you looked at this place? Yeah, and then yeah, just museums and museum websites as well. A few I found at museums. So for example, the Port Hardy Museum, I discovered Lillian Bland there. They had a bit of an exhibit about her, and I just thought, wow, amazing. And then was able to find more information about her. So that's pretty neat. And then, yeah, visiting Pooh Granny's garden. Yeah, is there another question?
I have one. Who was up in Quatsino Sound? I heard you mention.
Yes, Lillian Bland is her name. So she was born in Ireland and ended up moving to Quatsino Sound. Her husband preempted some land there, and she ended up moving there with him. She had built and flown her plane prior to coming to Quatsino Sound. But pretty interesting. And if you just Google Lillian, Lilian Bland, the website from it's like an Irish website, has some really amazing photos of her homestead in Quatsino Sound. Some of the machinery, some of the livestock. There's also some photos of her. She was a journalist before she moved. So, and she also rode horses, drove cars. Like, she was pretty neat. So yeah, the website has some fabulous photos. There's just just a beautiful one of her and her daughter, kind of in the forest among some big fallen logs, and just all of these foxglove flowers up around them. So,
and were they close to Holberg or Alert Bay, or?
They would have been closer to Holberg, yes. But yeah, near the settlement of Quatsino, but still like by boat from there. And there was a bit of a settlement around that time. Yeah, but I think her husband brewed his own home brew and I think he got thrown in jail a couple times for bootlegging it and selling it illegally to some of the hotels and brothels around that area.
Okay. And she did some of her writing from there, from home?
I don't think she wrote when she was there. I think she did most of her writing before, but she wrote letters home and that sort of thing. So yeah, she wrote letters home. She ended up moving away from Quatsino. It's quite a sad story, actually. She had a daughter, and her daughter ended up passing away quite young from tetanus. And then Lillian ended up moving back to Ireland, rather. Ireland or England? I think she moved actually back to England. She had been from Ireland though, and she ended up buying a house on a huge cliff and having all these gardens. And I think she played the stock market and ended up making quite a bit of money that way. And yeah, pretty much said I just don't like people, so I found a place with away from people, and really, yeah. Kind of a sad story. Like, she was quite heartbroken, understandably, and her husband ended up staying in Quatsino. Yeah, but her website's great if anyone wants to look at it. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, definitely will. It's just a little sidebar. It's just interesting that there are two journalists in Quatsino Sound, of all places. In Alert Bay, there's W.D. Moore, that was a logger, and he was a prolific contributor to newspapers and magazines.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, way up in the bush there, that people were.
Well, there wasn't a lot else to do, was there?
Yeah, I just see one more question. I'm not sure, we're probably trying to finish up, but thank you from Susan. We would like to involve young people in histories like this. Any ideas as a high school worker? I think.
Oh, excuse me, I meant Winter Harbor, not Alert Bay. I kept saying Alert Bay. I meant Winter Harbor. My wires get crossed nowadays.
Oh, no worries. I'd have to look at exactly which one is closer. But definitely.
Well, Winter Harbor. Yeah, Winter Harbor is for all the way west.
Okay, I think it probably would be closer to Holberg.
Okay.
So, yeah. So just involving young people in history, I would say go where they are, which I mean, any kind of having your website is so great. Social media.
Are you getting famous in your high school or anything?
Oh no, I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so. Some students have heard of like the books and they ask about them. I had a student come and ask about writing advice, and that was pretty neat. I sent her some websites and talked to her about plotting, plotting novels versus pantsing. So people who plot novels plan it all out and outline, and people who pants fly by the seat of their pants. And so Stephen King is a famous pantser. So he thinks that planning and outlining, of course, ruins the creative magic. And so I had that it was pretty neat to have that conversation with a student. And I'm an outliner, so I was like, whichever way you go with, and gave her some websites to look at and just tried to encourage her. So yeah, I wouldn't say I'm famous, but I think some of them like know of it. And if they're interested, it's neat when they ask about it, and just try to encourage and inspire them. So
Good.
yeah.
Great.
But thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, not sure if I need to hand it back over to Gerald or who I hand it back over to, Sue. But yeah, thank you everyone for having me.
Thank you, Haley.
Thank you.
And would you just give us your email address in case you want to come to your launch? Oh, you're muted.
Yes, thank you. I totally forgot. I'll put it in the chat here.
Okay.
It's Haley .Kuntz, KUNTZ @gmail.com. And you can also, yeah, that's probably the best way.
Great.
Haley.Kuntz @gmail.com. I also have a Facebook, just like on their own terms. I have a Facebook page for my books. You could also private message me through there if that's easier. But yeah, if anyone wants to send me an email, I would happily invite you to the launch. It will likely be at the, used to be called the Selby Street Pub, the Horse and Carriage, or the Lighthouse Bistro. I'm just figuring out the launch spot.
All right.
But thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us. A reminder that this will be posted on our YouTube channel, so you can view it later. And thank you again so much, Haley. It's been wonderful. Okay.